Sunday, YouTube. Welcome to North Carolina. And also, welcome to the USS North Carolina. Visiting another battleship that you can actually drive to with a semi-truck, which is magnificent. Just got to be real careful on the maneuvering here. Need to edge her in really careful. Parking lot is not exactly optimized for a semi-truck, but I did call ahead, made sure I got instructions. Where do I park? Is it going to be okay to bring my rig here? They said, oh yeah, use second entrance, you'll be all right. Yes, just like my clickbait title suggests, I'm such a vicious trucker assaulting a priceless national artifact, the USS North Carolina, also known as the Showboat. I love it when I have time to visit these ships. It is so much fun. It is always worth it. This is living history. And appropriately, in memoriam. The official dedication. Behind me, these are the hydroelectric steerers for North Carolina's starboard rudder. These were, of course, controlled primarily from the bridge, the conning tower, where all navigation orders were issued. But in an emergency, it can be controlled just forward there for manual operation in case of loss of communication or other emergency. This is a level of access that I don't think there even exists in any other battleship museum currently available to the public. I really have no idea if New Jersey or Massachusetts or Iowa have this access. So far, I've only seen it here in North Carolina. It's awesome. I'm roaming through the machine shop here, just in, I believe, forward of turret number 3. And when I came down into this space from one of the ladders here, I have no idea if this is done deliberately by the museum staff to ensure that all the machinery in here doesn't rust or corrode, but there is a heavy smell of, I can only assume it's lubricating and cutting oils more accurately. Just, yeah, nothing in here has probably operated in 50, 60, 80 years, because the ship was decommissioned in 1947, held in inactive reserve until 1961 when it was brought here to Wilmington in order to become a museum. I can only assume it's just leftover oil in the bottoms of the wells of the machinery all through here. But regardless if it's a deliberate act by the museum staff to preserve a sense of living history in this space, or a necessity to maintain the equipment in this space, just the smell of machinery down here, it's so present, so alive. This ship hasn't been under its own power probably since actually 1947, and you feel like just by it being in this space that they could turn her on tomorrow and she could cruise. I mean, that wouldn't be the case, of course, but still there's this feeling that at any moment the beating heart of this ship could come to life. And it's just all kind of embodied in this simple machining space right here. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm inside turret 2 right now, and I have to say the staff of the USS North Carolina Museum have done an absolutely outstanding job in preserving this space and making it accessible to the public. I visited Alabama, USS Alabama, a few months ago, if you saw that video, and they have their turret number 2 open as well, but it's in nowhere near as good a condition. Just now leaving turret 2, and World War II era battleships were not at all designed for the very tall. I mean, I'm 6'5", and well, the overhead piping and, well, framing and everything definitely was not designed with me in mind. Still, what a magnificent museum this ship is. You've got to get here and experience it yourself. My video just will not do it justice. Alright, so I kind of lied, but then again, I'm in officer country, so there's headroom here. There's an unusual amount of space between my skull top and the ceiling. Doorways and awnings aren't exactly, shall we say, still height friendly, but you know, beggars cannot be choosers. But this is officer country, North Carolina. In 1941, these amenities would have been luxurious. Wouldn't quite pass muster in today's Navy, I don't think, but still. I think this is turret number 1, the barbette for it, or at least the outer armor for it. Yeah. This ship is absolutely magnificent. I have to say, and I will continue to say throughout my self-guided tour here, that of the 3 U.S. battleship museums that I've been to, that I've had the great good pleasure of being able to visit. So just peek down this little corridor here to see what's what. Of the 3 battleships I've visited so far, Alabama, Missouri, and now North Carolina, I would definitely say that North Carolina is the best of the bunch so far. Now, Missouri needs an asterisk because Missouri was modernized in the 80s as part of Reagan's program to beef up the Navy. So there's a lot of elements of Missouri that are still behind closed doors, and same with New Jersey, Iowa, and Wisconsin, because all 4 of those ships, all 4 of the Iowas, did see modern service. Well, modern, meaning Cold War service. New Jersey was reactivated for Vietnam. Missouri, Wisconsin, and Iowa were reactivated under Reagan in the 80s. And they served, I think they were all 3 brought back into service, I think from 86 to 91. Be mistaken. I'm just pulling these numbers just kind of out of the ether here. And then all 4 Iowas were then decommissioned for the final time in 1991, I believe, maybe 1992. I think 91 for all 4 of them. And one by one, they all ended up donated as museums. Iowa being the last one and ended up in Los Angeles. New Jersey was the first, and of course went to New Jersey, where it is now moored across from Philadelphia on in an ice river. And Wisconsin is in Norfolk. While Missouri, of course, is standing watch over USS Arizona in Pearl Harbor. And so because those ships were modernized, because they have modern features, because they have modern equipment, there are elements of that equipment that are not for public consumption, whereas this ship essentially is still in her World War II configuration with a lot of her World War II equipment on display, or at the very least facsimiles of her World War II equipment on display. So because everything about this ship is quite literally outdated, nothing about it, as far as I'm aware, remains classified or restricted, and it really comes down to for the museum staff, for the curators, for the staff, for the folks who support this ship, who maintain it, paint it, clean it, and do integrity checks. It really comes down to how much of the ship can they support having open to the public, and how much of the ship can they sustain having open to the public, and the amount of the ship that they do have accessible for the public. Of those 3 battleships, at least based on my visits, is nothing short of outstanding. You've got one whole engine room essentially available. You can tour one complete turret, and I haven't quite done it yet, but I believe 2 actual gun houses, turret number 1 and also turret number 3 at the stern. The ship is incredible. I wish it was more operational. It could be made operational, but that is pure pipe dream. What it would cost to make this ship actually operational is just, I mean, that's money that you'd have to be willing to just completely say, because the return on investment on that would be nothing. You would just have to love this ship that much to do it. Assuming, of course, that the Navy and the state of North Carolina would let you, but maybe one day. So here at the stern of the ship, you get a pretty nice view of what I'm assuming is downtown Wilmington. Seems like a really nice city. Never been here before. It's my first time in this particular area of North Carolina, so it is really quite pleasant to get to experience even a little bit of it. I'm sure if I have more time, I'll try to experience more, but just the time is not there for that today. And of course, my reason for being here is twofold. Number 1, I'm delivering a little ways south of here tomorrow morning, and then of course number 2, I mean, I'm on a battleship. To me right now, that's just more important than visiting some downtown area. So, you know, it is what it is. But anyway, in case I misspoke earlier, it's turret 2 and turret 3, those gun houses, those are open. Turret 1 is not, as I'm aware of, currently open to the public. But turret 2, which of course has an excellent lower decks area that's open, which is easily the best turret experience I've had in a U.S. battleship museum, because I don't believe Missouri has any of her turrets open to the public. I don't remember there being one anyway. Alabama, I believe, has turret number 1 is open to the public, but it is in nowhere near as good a condition as turret 2 is here at North Carolina. The advantage that Alabama does have over North Carolina is it's easier to a point to experience the actual gun wells in the turrets, even though you can't just go down in there and actually get right up against the breech. So that's all secured spaces. You can't get there. You either have bar stock welded across the access points, or they wall them off, one of the two. I haven't been into turret number 3 yet. I'm going to do that before I get too much further carried away here. But overall, this museum is absolutely superb. And unlike Alabama, the core focus of this museum and memorial is the ship, its history, the artifacts pertaining to it. And replete throughout the whole ship are little personal anecdotes from crew who served aboard the ship, as well as some video and audio testimony and memory and story that was recorded and archived for purposes of display for people like me who may not ever have met or would never have met those gallant sailors and officers who served on this ship when she was in action and in commission. But what I did not know that surprised me, when the North Carolina was scheduled or intended to be scrapped in I think in 1960, 1961, one of the very first people who came to the ship's defense, at least according to a plaque here on the ship, on the superstructure, on the starboard side behind the pilot house, was President John Kennedy. He came to bat for this ship and is accorded the honorary rank of Admiral of the Battleship North Carolina, because he was one of the most prominent, or one of the first persons to ever really express an interest in saying, hey, we need to preserve this ship. And thousands of more people came behind him to support the ship, either in large or small components. And eventually, instead of being scrapped like her sister USS Washington, North Carolina made her way here to Wilmington, where she is now permanently on display as a memorial. One other difference between USS North Carolina and USS Alabama is that there are no other aspects of World War II that are really prominently on display here. The Alabama Museum and Memorial, they have a tremendous number of artifacts. They also have a small aviation museum. They have a B-52 on display. They think they have either an SR-71 or an A-12. They have some other aircraft on loan from other museums. They have the USS Drum submarine there on display as well. So you get a battleship and a submarine for the price of one museum admission ticket, which is pretty excellent. But to be fair to the North Carolina, what the mission of this museum and memorial is, at least what it seems to me, is to focus exclusively on this ship, everyone who served on it, and those who have worked very hard to preserve it and make sure it's going to be around for a long, long time to come as an element of inactive but still quite living history. So this is definitely a museum and memorial. If you have an appreciation for U.S. military history and U.S. history in general, even in just history, this ship is absolutely spectacular, and it is a wonderful museum. And I still have a little more to experience here yet before I wrap this up, and I'm going to go ahead and do so. So let's keep it up. All right, so I'm here in the gunhouse of Turret 3. Behind me are the different stations outside of the individual gun wells. The gun wells are behind these bulkheads and doors here. I won't give too much away because really this whole area is best experienced in person. I don't want to take away from this museum by showing everything, but I did want to talk a little about this gun house. And I was just talking to a gentleman in here a few moments ago, and we were just talking shop, comparing notes, talking history, and we were commenting that in 1938, when this ship was being built, or 1936, whatever it was, back in that day, all of this fabrication and assembly, that was a trade, without question. Right now in 2023, all of this same work, this is an art form. To do all this work, back then it was a trade, now it's an art. And in some ways we've lost that ability to engineer because we've wanted to make everything so shiny and chrome plated and special with software and LED lighting and whatnot, whereas this was purpose-built, hardy machinery and didn't need software to operate. Everything was analog. All the computational aspects of this weapon system, this gun system, was all analog. There was no software. No digital microchips either, nothing digital, no transistors. If anything was to do with any kind of anything, it was tubes, maybe. Other than that, it was analog. But, these guns went into action, and they did really good work for what they were doing. They were bombarding shore positions. They were used to sink a Japanese troop ship, and they kept our boys in the invasions of several islands covered, softened up those beachheads, did really good work, came out of these gun houses. This is where it all happened in so many respects. So it's these elements of these ships that make them so valuable, so incredibly wonderful to have them still as museums. Most of the navies of the world after World War II that had any ships left over, they were either sunk as targets post-war for nuclear tests or modern weapons tests over the years, or they were just scrapped or sunk for reefs in some cases. Only a handful of carriers, well, not a handful, I think most of the Essex-class carriers were modernized to some capacity to serve into the jet age and then through Vietnam, and in some cases up into the 90s, I think, as smaller carriers. While a lot of the destroyers were sold to smaller nations so they could actually have a navy, or at least a more modern navy, along with some of our cruisers. But all of our battleships either went to the scrapyard, went to the nuclear testing areas, or by the grace of God became museums. Only the 4 Iowas, like I talked about earlier, actually saw modern service. So history at its best. It's time to do the walk around. So around this walkway that surrounds the entirety of the ship, on the port side, near the parking lot, there is this sponsored, what they call the quarterdeck. It's this lovely standing area here with flags on display. It really is an extremely pleasant, very well built, very well taken care of walkway, and it lets you get close to the ship in a way that's not possible, to my knowledge, with any other battleship museum when the ship is on permanent display. As I'm making this video, Texas is currently in dry dock, which allows a previously impossible level of access to the ship if you're willing to pay to take the dry dock tour. But if you can't do that dry dock tour, or if Texas, when it's brought back to its display condition and display location, if they don't have an enclosed area, you won't be able to walk around the ship to the same degree you can walk around North Carolina. I've never been to the USS Texas, so I don't know what it was like beforehand, but suffice it to say, this is probably the most accessible battleship I've had the good pleasure of visiting. And one last unique feature I want to talk about before I wrap this video up is the fact that the ship is painted, very nicely painted, in its World War II camouflage. As far as I'm aware, this is the standard camouflage pattern the ship wore in combat. This is from a time when camouflaging a ship of this size was actually valid, because it would confuse the Mark I eyeball. It would confuse Japanese lookouts and spotters. It would also confuse potentially Japanese submarines that were trying to, of course, torpedo the ship. So this is a nice artifact from when camouflage actually meant something for warships. Nowadays, camouflage doesn't mean a thing for these warships. I mean, the official color of the U.S. Navy, as far as I'm aware, I think it's called haze gray. I think is the official name for that, or it's just the slang term for haze gray and underway. I don't know for sure, but suffice it to say, it's a gray, the typical gray U.S. Navy scheme you see, and it's the official peacetime, non-combat color scheme for the U.S. Navy, because the camouflage you see behind me, this is much more of obviously a wartime display, a wartime implementation, and it had a tactical purpose. Nowadays, with radar and laser range finding and sonar and all of the advanced guidance and optical systems that we have, that we currently utilize in modern combat, this camouflage scheme wouldn't do a thing for this ship in a modern combat situation. It's just here for decoration, essentially. But it is a really nice artifact, because as far as I'm aware, it's the only capital ship on museum display of this size that has a camouflage scheme still with it. I think everything else has been repainted the typical U.S. Navy gray. Now, I could probably be mistaken, because there's so many museum ships that we have the good fortune of having preserved, that there's a meme on the internet that essentially says if the entire U.S. Navy museum fleet was called up and reactivated and put back into service, it would become the second best Navy on the planet after our primary U.S. Navy, because of all the massive capital ships that we happen to have still in it. I mean, 8 battleships, at least 4 aircraft carriers, a bunch of submarines, diesel electrics, nothing nuclear unfortunately, but still a lot of subs, plenty of destroyers, a couple of cruisers, a lot of options to put together a really nasty fighting force using ships from a bygone but very much well remembered and in many cases beloved for a variety of reasons period in human history. It was the last great conflict fought on honest terms between honest armies and honest military forces, with official declarations of war as well as stated objectives and an official end to that conflict with the Articles of Surrender that were signed in Europe to complete the war there, and also aboard the deck of the Battleship Missouri in Tokyo Harbor in September 1945 to officially close World War II out completely. So I'll stop my rambling there. Thank you so much for watching. If you have the opportunity, do come down and visit this battleship, visit all the battleships and every museum you can get to from this time, because all of these ships do rely on public funds, public donations, and admissions and the gift shop in order to keep themselves funded, keep these ships in display condition. And in the case of the Iowas, keep them in a state where if the Navy wanted them back in service, they could actually, take them and reactivate them if they really, really wanted to. Whereas I don't think North Carolina or the North Dakotas that are still preserved, Massachusetts and Alabama, I don't believe that time will ever come where these three ships will be reactivated. But given the condition that North Carolina is in, and from what I've seen, my uneducated assessment of the ship, I would put good money on this ship being rated seaworthy. If they pulled her out of this inlet, took her to a dry dock and looked at her, it's entirely possible that if they opened everything up and got her operational, she could handle the seas, which that'd be magnificent. It won't happen, but it would be absolutely magnificent. So I'll leave that there, YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little presentation and my clickbait title, and I will see you down the road.